Hi, I'm Jonathan Mamaril here again on another HR Engage podcast, and this time I'm joined by Heidi Mayhew-Sanders. Heidi, how you going?
Very well, thanks, Jonathan. Very well. How are you?
Good, Heidi. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today because you've got a storied history in the HR scene. You're now moving in a slightly different direction from what you've done for such a long time. I'd love to pull up your LinkedIn and go through your resume and do all that, but you're in front of us. So why don't we? I just ask you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yep, sounds great. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. So about me, I guess, well, I'm a Australian country girl
Yep.
originally, and I then went abroad after school and really travelled and lived abroad for 17 years. So a lot of my career has been overseas.
Whereabouts, Heidi?
Mainly, I was based in England, but I covered Europe. I also worked for an American firm, a big American firm. So
Wow.
I did quite a bit of work back and forth between England and America at the time that I worked with them, which was fantastic. You know, it gave me a great opportunity to really work in diverse cultures, different regions with different cultures, and really understand my career, I guess, in different cultures, which I really enjoyed. Yeah.
You say that you had a storied history overseas. Was it
Mm-hmm.
always in HR, or were you working in other industries or
Yeah.
positions?
Yeah. So good question. So I actually started in operations.
Oh,
So yeah,
okay.
so my role was sort of the operations manager in my roles. I also worked in investment banking with mergers and acquisition teams where they would take over companies, and I, would sort of be, I guess, everything operation to help
Yep.
those teams that often came from different countries into the UK to take over companies, run and make sure things were happening. And then around late 90s, early 2000s, I sort of started to move more and more into HR purely because of what I had to do. It started to involve more people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I actually then did further study for human resources and thought, okay, well, my career seems to be moving this way. I like it. And so I sort of moved more into the HR role and focused on that as being my career going forward.
So your HR journey essentially started because you found that you were doing more of the people side anyway. Do you mean people management or people development? What type of HR work were you doing prior to really getting into human resources
Yeah.
more formally?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, it was really managing the people, or the people aspects.
Mm-hmm.
So if I use Southern Energy, which was a company I worked for, very large American utility firm, who was one of the mergers and acquisition firms that I was allocated to from the bank to work with. And then once they were successful in taking over, they took over the first electricity board regularised over in the UK. And once they were successful doing that, they wanted to set up an office and do more acquisitions in Europe. And
Yep.
so that is sort of when I started to do more HR. It was recruiting people. It was, helping bring over expats and, from America and, setting up things in the office where we actually had people employed and things like that. So that's sort of the very beginning on where I started. But of course, I was with them for 5 years and
Yep.
I actually only left them because they moved their business or their head office, because they grew very big over in Europe as well, to Amsterdam because they were setting up a trading floor to actually trade electricity and
Wow.
things. Yeah, I had 2 small children and a life in London, so I decided that it was probably time to look for another role.
Oh wow. So the two children that prevented you going to Amsterdam, you stay in London, and so you sort of continue your journey into human
Yeah,
resources. So give us a little bit of a rundown of that human
yeah,
resources journey.
yeah. So basically, I stayed in the financial services sector because that was sort of, so whilst it's, Southern Energy wasn't financial services, it was through the banks and the acquisitions and
Yep.
mergers that I ended up in that space. And I like that space. It's very fast paced and high risk. They're not afraid to make decisions quickly and things like that. So I guess I joined another bank called Nordea Securities, which is a Scandinavian bank. And again, I worked for the office, which was set up here in London, as I'm going to say, it was small because we did an acquisition and bought an M&A company. And so it was a bit of a combination, again, of human resources, all things HR. In those days, in that industry, it was mainly around onboarding people, recruiting people, training people, making sure that they had the right training and tools of trade, if you like, to be able to get their job done. When I moved into a sort of a more senior role where I was more, I guess, aligned with the head office, which was in Stockholm. And that's when I started to really get into, more HR initiatives around performance management and programs, appraisal process and the whole suite of, managing your people at work. So, yeah. Yeah, so that's sort of where I went. And then I continued to work in the space of private equity. I worked for the Carlyle Group, which is a big American private equity firm, and asset management, all HR. I'd call myself a generalist because, I've always been in the position where I've covered most of HR, and I've really liked that. I think that's been very beneficial for me as a younger person to have the opportunity to be able to, move into and really focus on all aspects of HR rather than being pigeonholed into one. Yeah, so basically, my role, I guess, in the UK was what would be equivalent to a business partner. Yep. And, I worked for Fidelity International, which is a large asset management firm. I was allocated to a few business units, which was similar to what happens here in Australia. And my role was very much to make sure that I was working with our HR senior team to deliver all the HR initiatives that needed to be rolled out into my business unit area.
And when did you find yourself moving to Australia?
Yeah, so in 2009, I had to make the choice of whether my children were going to spend some time living in Australia or spend the rest of their time in England. My daughter was about to start applying for, high school and things like that.
Yep.
So it was a hard call, but I thought, no, we're doing it. So we came back to Australia in 2009, mid-2009. And then, I moved to the Gold Coast because my parents were living there at the time, and I sort of was thinking, how am I going to do this, right? And quickly learnt that there wasn't a lot of positions for me at the Gold Coast at my level. And so started to look at Brisbane for roles.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it was a really bad time because I don't know if you remember what the end of 2009 brought, but there was a lot of people actually being made redundant.
Yes.
And so it took me 4 months to get a job, which was really tough and shocking for me because I'd always been employed and never had a problem. Interestingly, one of the comments kept coming to me is that I didn't have any Australian experience, which I thought was interesting. I certainly didn't agree that was going to be an issue because HR is HR, right? You just need to learn, around the right legislations, know where to go, know who to help you in understanding the region you're in. But I was lucky then to land a job. I did some temping work with Suncorp in their REM area, but for me, I like the generalist type of roles. So I was then lucky to get a job with a company called Bentley's Queensland, which is a professional services firm, as their HR manager, brought in to, I guess, shift them away from been very traditional and, quite, the word's not immature, but they didn't have a lot of insight into really what they needed to do in HR. But they did have the initiative and the insight to know they needed to do more than what they were doing. So I joined them in early 2000. And I basically been with them. It started with half a resource shared with our marketing team. And when I left in June 2024, I had a team of 8, including an L&D person, recruitment person, advisor, coordinator, and then an offshoring team, which I also was part of setting up for the company.
It's really interesting, your journey. And I just want to pick up one part of that journey in particular, which is that transition from international to Australia. And you find, now, obviously, there was that period in 2009. There were some difficulties globally, but also in
Yes.
Australia that we had, but the crisis that we had. But if we look at it, a lot of, in particular HR, I'm sure in other areas have this difficulty, but particularly in HR, I do hear quite a lot of people who have this vast experience overseas and there's a bit of a difficulty getting back into the Australian market. Yours is probably a little bit different, where you didn't have necessarily all that experience at all in Australia, but there's still that difficulty that intersect. Your thoughts on this? Do you think is there a particular reason why you think this is happening? It seems to still be happening. I suspect.
Yeah,
Quite a few people.
it's interesting. It is interesting. I mean, it was a shock to me. I
Yeah.
wasn't expecting it at all, particularly as I had on my resume really demonstrated that I had worked with so many different regions,
Yeah.
because I covered Europe. So, and I'd even worked in Russia, that
Wow.
I sort of felt that it was a bit of a shock to me. I think it was more around just, look, if I went to Sydney or Melbourne, it could have been
Yeah.
different. But I think a lot of the head offices for, human resources are based out of the bigger cities at that time anyway. And so I think the companies that I was sort of applying to that had roles here who were much more domestic and I guess Queensland focused,
Yeah.
just were not used to employing people that had experience and applying this experience into their company here. And I think it's probably scared them a little bit, to be honest, around, well, she's had all these global experiences, and we're hiring someone into, to do just our HR. And that the firms that I was getting presented to, because they were the ones with the opportunities that weren't in the other countries, in the other states,
Yeah.
were privately owned, probably mid-tier type of size firms.
Yes.
And yeah, it's a bit scary for them.
Yeah.
I don't really know why. I think it's improved.
Yep.
Certainly, from the aspect that even my team at Bentley's, I had people in the Philippines, working with us. So it's definitely improved.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose the other question that sort of brings to my mind is, you've got this great history in human resources. Why are you passionate, or why do you enjoy human resources?
Yes. Look, I'm going to be honest, I don't enjoy it every day. The reason for that is because it is a very challenging role at times. You're dealing with people, and I think the more the more we go on and the more generations we have in our workforce, and the more changes we have around technology and all these sorts of things, and also employment, IR and ER, it can be very, very stressful and challenging for people to work in the HR space. But on the flip side, I really enjoy that. I enjoy a challenge. I enjoy, having something pop up that's I need to think about really deeply. And also, I guess my whole passion is around helping individuals or companies be the best they can, whatever that is. And I
Yep.
think HR has certainly given me that opportunity to fulfill that side of my career passion for sure.
I think we'd be remiss to tap into your experience, because you've had such great experience overseas. You've been a long time head of HR for a professional services firm here in Australia as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love a lot of listeners to this podcast are probably early career or
Yeah.
people who have moved from, I don't know, something like operations and into HR.
Yeah.
And, for those early career people, I want you to time travel a little bit to the early career you, Heidi, and go back to that early career Heidi and say, so what advice would you have for early career Heidi?
Yeah. I would say take every opportunity you can, like back yourself. Don't be afraid. I think that I probably didn't always do that.
Mm-hmm.
In my career, I sort of stood back a bit because I was a bit afraid that maybe I didn't know how. But saying that, I did have a lot of opportunity to, I was lucky because I was led by people that just would throw you in sort of a sink and swim scenario. And I managed to do that. So I would say don't be afraid, believe in yourself. It's better to have a go and try. And, there's such great support around you that, have a go. Just, believe in yourself and actually, go for it and do it. And also, with being respectful and, inquisitive and insightful and everything is very important along the way as well. But just back yourself and believe
Mm.
that you can do it.
Also on the flip side, though, so that's a really good tip, I think, because on the flip side, we probably also have people like yourself, senior HR people, people in senior positions. Some have a seat at the table. Some have been in the industry for a long time. What advice or what two big pieces of advice would you have for the more senior people in HR?
Well, I think the first thing, and maybe this is because I've been in operations, right? But you've got to be able to think outside HR.
Mm.
I mean, for me, it's about thinking of the bigger picture. So often I've seen people in the career, particularly, when they're sort of at that, they're not senior, but they're not junior or whatever,
Yep.
just
Some of that in
be
between.
technically good, have done their education, understand, the concepts of HR and, have had maybe 5 or 6 years experience or whatever. But the ability to be commercial, in terms
Mm.
of, okay, well, in my firm, what is in my firm, in my industry, with my budget, what makes sense to implement. And being really, I guess, focused on thinking more deeply around whether the initiative you're about to roll out or you're about to try and influence your partners or managers to buy into is actually appropriate for your firm. Because I see a number of times, the buzzwords come out and then suddenly everyone's trying to implement something,
Yeah.
which quite frankly may not be right for your firm at the time. So I think, that's the number one. And the number two for me is always continue to sharpen yourself.
Mm.
So, I mean, I've been in human resources for 25 plus years and, as you know, recently moved into a consulting role. And it's so important to stay sharp, have your knowledge, and also keep your leadership skills sharp as well. Because to be at the top table, you need to be able to be a strong leader and you need to be able to negotiate and influence and nurture and, call the hard shots when you have to. So
Yep.
they're all leadership skills in my view. So it's important that you do that if you want to be at the top table.
It seems that from what you're saying, there's the commerciality of it, but there's also, keep on sharpening your skills, keep on sharpening, and not just your HR skills, but also your leadership skills. That's a very interesting take. Do you think that is something that needs to be paid more attention to from in that perspective?
I really do,
Yeah.
because to be at the top table, you have to demonstrate you're a leader, right? And it doesn't matter what what department or
Mm-hmm.
area you sit in, you have to be able to influence people. You have to be able to, put a good business case together. You have to be able to, show empathy, manage people, all these things. And that's good leadership. And also to drive culture, you need to lead. And so I
Mm.
think it's very important. I do think it gets overlooked, particularly if human resources, IT, even the finance department or whatever, they're all operational roles in the view of the professionals. If you're
Yep.
working in a professional service firm who are delivering to clients and bringing in fees. So for you to be able to have a voice and to really make a difference, which is very important to have all the back office stuff and all the stuff that supports an organization. If you want to have a voice, then you have to be a good leader. So
Mm.
I think, yeah.
Interesting. You've been in HR for a while now. I suppose the question for me is, what are the biggest challenges you're facing now in human resources, and how are you tackling it?
Look, I think the biggest challenge for HR at the moment is the pace of change.
Ooh, okay.
Whether that's from a work mix in terms of, the different generations we're in there, whether it's from the capabilities around technology and how you need to embrace and start training your people in AI or whatever it might
Yep.
be. But also the one that sticks out, which you'll appreciate, is HR people aren't lawyers, right? So trying to keep your head across all the different scenarios and I guess, complexities around the multi layers of, IR issues that can pop up in your workforce that are actually could be linked to another act or another situation. I think that's very challenging for HR people because they're time poor, right? They're
Yep.
just trying to do the HR side, but there's such high risk now if you're not, I guess, implementing things and addressing, HR from not only a risk perspective, but, from the perspective of just making sure you're across all the knowledge. It's
Yep.
pretty impossible, I think, to do that. And that's hard, very hard. So that's sort of the main challenge I would see for HR people. In terms of, my clients, now that I'm sort of in the consulting world,
Yep.
etc., a lot of the challenges are the same, right? Keeping across what they need to know, interpreting information that they're not quite sure about. But the big one still is resourcing.
Yeah.
Just how do I resource and how do I retain? And for me, it's so interesting because it doesn't matter what industry you're in. They all have that pain point in a big way. This is the importance of being commercial and importance of influencing and all these things that you need to do as a good HR person to be able to actually, I guess, provide the right advice for your specific client. And
It,
that may be you're not the right person to provide the advice, right?
yeah, and I think those challenges, I mean, the pace of change, I think that works on so many levels. You touched on technology, you touched on the new legislation, you touched on also the mix of people involved in a workplace. But every single ones that you talked about, all three of those, HR are usually going to be involved in some way, shape, or form. And the thing is, there is not going to be a blanket antidote for all three of them because it'll depend on the business and depend on the
Exactly.
industry, depend on the leadership. Yeah, so sharpening up those persuasion skills, those negotiation
Yeah,
skills is going to be even more important. Those people, not necessarily people management skills, or those people conversational skills are going to be much more
absolutely.
prominent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, part of an HR person's role is gone are the days where, people employ you and then pass you the problem and you deal with it. If that's what you're doing as an HR person, you need to think about that. What your job is to help them through the problem, to
Mm.
help the managers take ownership of some of these problems, which would traditionally just be pushed to HR, to deal with, because that's not the way we do things anymore in this world. And I think that HR people need to have the confidence and the leadership skills, I guess, to be able to work with the business people, the managers within the business, and help them grow their confidence in actually managing their people in a proactive manner. So actually we don't end up with, issues. There's always going to be issues, right? But
Yes.
we can minimize them and we can influence our culture. So I certainly know from my experience, people that are looking to join a company are always looking at the people they're going to work with. They're not looking at the HR people. Sorry, guys, but so it's pretty important that the people in the company have that education around managing their people, and this is one of the things that I'm passionate about. When I say, for me, it's about helping people, whether it's from a company perspective or an individual perspective, be the best version of what they can be in the workforce. And if you're climbing up the ladder, and even if you're not, that's about showing leadership skills and showing the ability to listen, the ability to flex, all these sorts of things that are so important.
It's so interesting talking to you because you touch on so many points. I'd like to maybe change the gears a little bit because I want to ask you a particular question that I ask pretty much everyone that comes onto this podcast, and that is, what is the one thing about human resources that people might disagree with you about?
Yeah, I think the one thing that people might disagree about is that when I feel a lot of the time that a lot of the employees feel that the HR person is employed to work for the employer and never has their interest really in the best place. It's always the employer.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that could be true. But this depends on you as an HR person. So, it's very important that you are able to find the balance as an HR person to be able to make sure that people don't think that HR is just for the employer and not for them. And that can be very challenging, again, because at the end of the day, you work for the employer, and if they make the final decision, and sometimes that can come across as if human resources has made this decision. But my view is that people have the perspective of that is wrong. If you are a good, solid HR person and you're confident and you invest in yourself and understand the business and the people in it, then, your job is to look after everyone's best interest. And that again, it's a skill set that you have to work on.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, if you look at what people are doing in human resources right now, there seems to be so many debates on a lot of things, a lot of aspects. But that seems to be one that has probably always been there, that balancing the line between employers and employees. And they're all, especially now that employee well-being is becoming much more prevalent, or much more prevalent area or focus of data, statistics, research, and even just, like if you look at basically any, every second book about leadership, there's always something around employees or staff and well-being. So do you think, does that make it, I don't know what does it make it harder to have that balance, or do you just have to make sure that that balance is more structured in some way, or is there another answer to that?
Look, I think it is hard. I think, I don't know whether it's harder, it's just different.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean. What I think is the opportunity here is for us to be more inclusive. Like if you think about traditional work structure, it's highly hierarchical.
Yeah.
And jobs were very structured and things like that. That's not the case anymore. You've got to have hierarchies, of course, who have responsibilities, but I think that role has now changed.
Yeah.
and also the way we make decisions has also changed. So, for example, much more consultation with staff,
Yes. Yes.
much more inclusiveness in terms of let's make this decision, or we're about to do this, etc. And I think all of that is creating better opportunity for everyone to do well, even though we do have some problems around, that still, oh well, when I was a manager, I did this, so trying to get that mindset change where, well, I know, and look, I'm a Gen Xer, right? So, I've been in those structures for years, but that doesn't stop me now from thinking a different way. And, is it easy? No, sometimes it's not easy. But I think as HR professionals, you need to be able to flex, and you need to be able to draw on all the positives that you can find to, I guess, make the company move forward, and a good experience for all, but also be productive.
Yeah. And I suppose it's always that tension
Yeah,
of productivity and experience, like that.
yeah,
There's that tension always. I think also we're probably in an age now where we do have baseline legislative requirements around things like essentially based around wellness or at least safety.
yep,
So you've got psychosocial risks, you've got right to disconnect. So there's at
yep,
least there are some baseline that has forced companies and managers and leaders,
yep,
has forced their hand to take a different approach.
definitely.
But I think what you're saying is a bit more than that. You're saying that the balance has to be already there. You really have to have that balance. It can't just be a legislative minimum, because and I think this is what you're trying to say, is that if you don't
Yes,
have that balance, the imbalance will in itself essentially causes issues and problems in an age where retention and recruitment are not the best.
yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Exactly what I'm saying. And sometimes that can be hard.
Mm, mm, mm.
You
And I
know,
suppose balancing that with the commerciality, and you're saying that that tr- maybe the best way to put it, return on investment. There's some sort of
yeah,
ROI
yeah, yeah,
on what HR does. So there's a commerciality around understand the business, understand all the to some extent the levers, or at least how
yeah,
they make money, and
yeah.
that's somehow connected to what's been done in HR or human resources.
Look,
But balancing that,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. I think for me, that's the difference between successful HR professional and not so.
mm,
It's very important to understand the business you're working in. And look, even so far as certainly in professional services, their clients. Who
yeah,
are the people that we are employing? Who are they actually working and servicing? Because if they're only servicing, mums and dads, not that I'm differentiating between anyone,
yeah,
everyone should get the same service. But naturally, if you've got some workers who are just working with that type of group, and actually most of their work is internal, then their training investment is going to look very different to the workers that you employ that are actually working with much higher, larger
mm,
organizations, or higher, feeds into the company and things like that. So it's about really drilling down and going, where am I going to spend the money? And also, what initiatives are important to push right now for our firm or our company? And my strategy has always been, when I came out of banking, I was very fast paced. And I have to
yep,
admit, when I came to work at Bentley's, I within 3 years, I was thinking, I can't do this because it was too slow.
yeah,
But then what I realized is it wasn't I couldn't do it. I had to change my mindset.
mm,
I had to change my mindset that aligned with my partners at the time, which was, if I introduced one or two initiatives in an HR space to them a year that they accepted, and we got a return on the investment, then they would continue to do that. For
yeah.
me, I'm like, I want to put everything in right now, but
Do it
it's
now, do it now.
exactly. But by the time I was 5 years, 6 years into Bentley's, that wasn't even a question. I
Yeah,
just put things on the table, they'd agree, because they had actually seen. So the pace of how you manage your stakeholders and all those sorts of things are really important. as an HR person.
So getting some runs on the board, building some of that mana or that capital, that
Yeah.
leverage, so that you can go in and make some significant change, or even bigger change or bigger projects.
Yep.
But you're saying going in on that too hard or too early without building up that capital can be difficult.
Absolutely.
Frustrating.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It can. It
Yeah.
can be difficult and can be frustrating, and, it can be very demotivating as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a tradition on the HR Engage podcast where we ask a number of rapid fire questions. So I want to ask you a list of questions here
Yeah.
about you,
Okay.
and just answer the first thing that comes to your mind. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. So Heidi, what is your favorite movie?
Oh, gee. I've got many, but the first one that comes into my mind is Meet the Fockers.
Oh, wow.
I'll tell you why, because every time I see that movie, it makes me laugh.
It is
It's
super
just
funny.
a funny movie, and I love that. And, we need to laugh in this day and age, and Meet the Fockers always makes me laugh.
Excellent choice. What's your favorite holiday destination?
Gee whiz, I've been lucky to travel a lot, but I would say my favourite is Greece, particularly Skopelos and Skiathos, which are two islands which are more in the north as opposed to the south of Greece. Yeah,
How
gorgeous.
do you discover these places? Like, how do you discover this? I mean, do you see a Lonely Planet or something? Like, what? How do you discover this?
Well, I think I was very lucky because I lived abroad for 17 years. So, Europe was the holiday destination. And, so I came across Skiathos originally. And then I knew Skopelos was next door that looked great. But I actually never visited Skopelos until, 4 years ago when I went, just after COVID, when I decided I'm going back to Greece and I'm going to Skiathos, but I'm going to Skopelos as well. And Skopelos is amazing, beautiful, beautiful island. And you can catch a water taxi all the way across to Skiathos, and, so it's really cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Sounds actually amazing. Apart from family and friends, who has inspired you the most?
Oh, look, this one's easy for me.
Yeah.
I talked about Southern Energy, the American utility firm. So the company had over 30,000 people in it.
Yep.
It was global, as you're aware. And the CEO, Charles W. Whitney, an American man, Chuck, we used to call him, he was so inspirational to me. I'd never met a man who could just get on the level to everyone. So he used to come in and make the receptionist feel as important as, the second in charge of the company. He just had this energy and could do attitude, and, just really inspired me. I always said, that is how I want to manage my people. I want people to feel that comfortable with me. So he's been a huge aspiration in my life.
Did you ever get to say that to him?
Look, sadly, no.
Yeah.
I didn't, because that was a long time ago. And then, I left and he went back to America. And, I have actually tried to track him down to tell him, because I refer to him often. I think of him often. He's like a little, person on my shoulder that sometimes just keeps me in check.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So, I mean, look, if on the possibility that Chuck is listening to this podcast, hi, Chuck, well done. Your inspiration has led to Heidi to where she is, or played a part in Heidi being here. So, congratulations, well done.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. If you find somebody who you inspire, who inspires you to be better and the best you can be, like, keep that. It's worth a lot.
Excellent. That's really good. What's the thing? I think I already know the answer to this, but I will ask it so the crowd knows as well. What is the thing you do outside of work that you are passionate about or keeps you going?
That'd be physical exercise.
Yeah, well, I do that. Yep.
I did 3 classes before this session. So I actually really, really enjoy keeping fit. Because I feel, healthy body, healthy mind.
Yes.
And in the world we live in, it's so important to keep yourself fit because it really does have an impact on your well-being. So I would So that's my passion. If I don't do it, I'm a different person. But the other thing I really enjoy doing is playing the piano.
Yeah, I actually I did not know that. So there you go. Piano. I knew about the physical exercise. And
Yeah.
by the way, Heidi, does a physical exercise ever have any dangers that go with that, Heidi?
Yes, the odd one or two, Jonathan,
Yes.
certainly the odd knee injury very recently, actually, but I'm back on track. So that's great.
Good. Good stuff. We won't blame the exercise. That's just it's completely different, completely separate to what we're talking about. Yeah, no, excellent. Now, apart from piano and apart
Yeah.
from coming from operations, tell us something about yourself that people don't know about you.
So I left Australia when I was in my early 20s and I flew to America
Mm-hmm.
and I bought a car and I drove around America.
Yep.
And then I ended up back in Canada. In America, I did things like worked as extras on movies in LA and, was a
Any
chef.
movies that we know?
Probably not. Switched to Birth was the big one at the time, but that was such a long time ago.
Who's that starring?
Gosh, now you're
That's
digging
it.
in.
That
It's
is.
such a long time ago.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a while back, but it was really fun. It was a great experience. But then also I moved into Canada, then just going to spend 3 weeks there, and I spent a year there. So I pretty much just hitchhiked across Canada. I did everything from tree planting to cherry picking.
Oh wow.
That's where I learnt to ski. I spent 3 months on a ski resort, and actually, when my visa ran out, I had to sell my ski gear, and then I flew to London,
Yep.
which was the cheapest ticket I could get anywhere where I could actually work. I had $50 and I went down to the King's Road and got a job in a pub for my accommodation and then lived there for 17 years.
I, I don't even know what to say. I mean, one, I did not know that about you, but also two, yeah, a bit surprising, like really surprising. How cool is that? I mean, that's amazing. So around America, did you just drive randomly, or
Yeah,
you went to some
I
main
did.
places? Like, what did you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, so when I flew into San Francisco, and
Yeah.
so I actually met a person on the train who was a young guy studying law,
Yep.
funnily
Okay,
enough.
you go.
Yeah, and sort of so I was hanging around for San for a while, and then I moved. Then he passed me on to people in LA, and then they passed me on to people in like I was very lucky to from that one contact to actually work my way around all the way to Miami, and then at Miami I took a risk and decided to take a job on a boat with people I didn't know,
Yeah.
and to get up the East Coast, which was thank God the risk was okay. I came out okay. Yes,
Wow.
so that was awesome. And then when so everywhere I went, I pretty much just met people along the way. And I was lucky in Canada. I had a friend who was studying engineering and architecture at
Yep.
university in Vancouver. So I caught up with him and we went to a similar school, the boys' school and the girls' school, if you know what I mean, in Australia. Yeah, and then so yes, I've done a lot of traveling on my own, which I think has only strengthened my ability to be a really good HR person.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
That's really amazing. Oh, well, we'll close it up soon, but I'll
yeah,
just ask you a couple more questions if that's okay.
yeah, sure.
That we always ask our HR Engage podcast interviewees or attendees or guests. If you could recommend a book, movie, TV show, or podcast to listeners, what would it be and why?
Okay. Well, I mean, this is not going to be a recommendation specifically for human resources because I think there's so much more. This to be a good HR person, you've got to be on the ball, you've got to be fit, you've got to be, in good mindset. So I'm going to recommend a book called How to Be Well by
Mm,
Dr. Karen Coates, which is a book which is really designed around, your state of being in terms of, where am I? Am I thriving? Am I surviving or am I depleted? And the whole book is around analyzing where you are and then has all these strategies in terms of how you can get yourself either out of or stay in, or the state that you're in. And I found that was really good, and I think it's very important for HR people to have good health, because you do deal with a lot of things which are traumatic at times, and stressful. And so if you're not in good shape, both physically and mentally, then it's all that harder to be successful. And it's a great book to read as a reset. If you're thinking, if you're feeling a bit, overwhelmed or whatever, it's a really good book to sort of gives you a good, clear, without going over the top,
Yes.
information to be able to get yourself back on track.
That's a good one. That's a great
Yeah.
one. And do you have a quote or moment of inspiration you'd like to leave us with?
Okay. It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. So that quote is by Lou Holtz, and you probably don't know who he is because he's very old now. He's 88 years of age, but he was a American football coach. Yeah,
Yep.
and I think, for me, that really resonates to me.
It was so good to talk to you, Heidi, because you think about your journey. It was really, really overseas based. We're talking, in London. We're talking Europe. We're talking, mergers and acquisitions. Very operations heavy for a long period of time, and you found yourself really doing a lot of people management, dealing with a lot of people management issues, and you sort of almost gravitated towards HR, and then there was almost like a flick of a switch, and you went, okay, I'm going to decide this is where I want going forward. And pretty much from that moment on, you really just kept on going in human resources, had a storied career overseas, and then came to Australia and worked for a professional services firm for a very long time. But what I really enjoyed listening to as well was that philosophy that you had, which resonated. And I think it's partly because you came from the operations side, which is the commerciality of HR. How does that you connect the commerciality of HR with the organization, and also being able to then, I suppose, communicate that in some way, shape, or form to people who have, I suppose, in decision-making positions. Also, like the point you made about if you really want to be at that top level in HR, you can always be technically good at what you do and you'll get to a certain level, but to be at that top level, you really need to have those skills honed. In particular, you talked about not just your HR skills, but your leadership skills, which I thought was really interesting. And I thought that was a really good point that we could really come back with. But then I think overall as well, from a personal perspective, wellness, and I know you're really into the fitness side of things, the physical fitness, but you also talked about the mindset as well. And I think that's really helped you going forward in your career. And I hope that's something that other people can pick up on in terms of the human resources career.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Heidi, thank you so much for being on the HR Engage podcast. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a great opportunity, and I love, chatting to you always, Jonathan. So, I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Well, there's another one there with Heidi Mayhew-Sanders on the HR Engage podcast. Of course, as always, subscribe, like, follow. If you're watching us, whether you are in a train or a bus or you're on a plane, no matter what it is, make sure you hit that subscribe or like or follow button, and you can always get the next episode that's always going to come out every couple of weeks on the HR Engage podcast. I'm Jonathan Matt. Speak soon.